A rat is given a choice between two bottles of water. One is clean. The other is laced with enough morphine to keep it high all day. The rat drinks the drugged one. Again and again. It stops eating. It stops grooming. It ignores every other rat in the cage. Within weeks, it's dead. Scientists ran this experiment thousands of times, and it always ended the same way. And for decades, this was the proof. This was how we knew what addiction was. The drug hijacks the brain. The drug wins. The drug kills. Except one scientist looked at that cage and asked a question nobody else had thought to ask. Not what drug is the rat taking, but where is the rat living? And what he found broke the entire story we tell about addiction. Let's start with the cage. Because the cage is the part everyone ignored. For most of the 20th century, the classic addiction experiment looked like this. A single rat. Alone. In a small metal box. Bright light overhead. Nothing to do. Nothing to explore. No other rats. Just the animal, the bars, and 2 water bottles. One plain. One loaded with morphine, cocaine, or heroin. The rat, predictably, drank itself to death. This experiment was so clean, so repeatable, that it became the foundation of how we understood drugs. In the 1980s, one of the most famous public service ads in American history was built on it. The rat that presses the drug lever until it dies. The message was simple. The chemical is so powerful that any brain exposed to it is doomed. But in 1977, a psychologist at Simon Fraser University in Canada named Bruce Alexander was staring at these experiments, and something bothered him. The rats weren't just taking drugs. They were living in solitary confinement, in a cage barely bigger than their own body, in conditions that would drive any social animal to the edge. So Alexander asked the question that changed everything. What if the drug isn't causing the addiction? What if the cage is? To find out, he built something the field of addiction research had never seen. He called it Rat Park. It was enormous, roughly 200 times the size of a standard laboratory cage. The walls were painted with forests and streams. There were tin cans to hide in, wood shavings to burrow through, wheels to run on, balls to push around. And most importantly, there were other rats, 16 to 20 of them, males and females, living together. They could socialize, they could mate, they could play. It was, for a rat, a genuinely good life. Then Alexander ran the same experiment everyone else had run. 2 bottles, one plain water, one laced with morphine, sweetened so the bitterness wouldn't put them off. And here is where the story everyone believed started to fall apart. The rats in Rat Park tried the morphine. They sampled it, but they wouldn't commit to it. They'd take a sip and wander off to do something else. Given the choice between getting high and living their lives, they chose their lives. Over and over again. The isolated rats in the small cages, meanwhile, drank the morphine at up to 16 times the rate of the Rat Park rats. Same drug, same dose, same species. The only thing that was different was the world the rat was living in. But Alexander wasn't finished. Because a skeptic could still argue the Rat Park rats just never got hooked in the first place. So he ran a crueler version. He took a group of rats and forced them into addiction. For 57 straight days, the only water available was the morphine water. No choice. By any definition used in the isolated cage experiments, these rats were now addicts. Their bodies were dependent. Then he moved them into Rat Park. By the old theory, these rats were finished. The chemical had them. They should have kept drinking the morphine until it killed them. They didn't. Dropped into a rich, social world, the addicted rats voluntarily chose to give up the drug. They drank the plain water. They put up with the discomfort of withdrawal, the tremors, the sickness, in exchange for a normal life. They wanted to be present for the world they'd been given more than they wanted to be numb to it. The addiction, it turned out, was never just chemical hooks sinking into a helpless brain. The addiction was a response to the cage, and this is the part that nobody was ready to hear. For 100 years, we told a very simple story about drugs. The drug is the villain. The chemical is so powerful it rewires you against your will. Get exposed, get hooked, get destroyed. The rat, the lever, the death. It all fit, but Rat Park suggested the opposite, that the drug was almost secondary, that what actually drove an animal to press that lever until it died wasn't the substance in the bottle. It was isolation, emptiness, a life with nothing in it worth staying sober for. The rats in the small cages weren't weak, they weren't chemically doomed, they were doing something almost rational, reaching for the only relief available in a world that offered them nothing else. And there was already evidence of this in humans, sitting in plain sight, that everyone had managed to ignore. At the height of the Vietnam War, roughly 1 in 5 American soldiers was addicted to heroin, pure, cheap, everywhere. Public health officials were terrified. They expected hundreds of thousands of addicts to come home and flood the streets. Then the soldiers came home, and around 95% of them simply stopped. No rehab, no relapse. They walked away from one of the most addictive substances on earth. The old theory couldn't explain that. Rat Park could. The heroin hadn't changed. What changed was that the men had left the jungle, the fear, the boredom, the horror, the cage, and gone back to families, jobs, and lives that were worth being awake for. The drug was never the whole story. It was the cage that made the drug worth dying for. Julian Mistine. Now, Alexander's experiment was messy. Later, scientists tried to repeat it and got tangled results. Some couldn't reproduce his numbers at all. Addiction is more complicated than one painted cage in Vancouver, and anyone who tells you it comes down to a single cause is selling you something. But the question Rat Park asked never went away, because it wasn't really a question about rats. Look at where addiction actually concentrates in human societies. It clusters in the places where connection has broken down, where people are isolated, where work has disappeared, where communities have hollowed out, where there's nothing left to belong to. The correlation is almost impossible to miss once you've seen it. The opposite of addiction may not be sobriety, it may be connection. And that should make you look at your own life differently. Because we have built, for ourselves, cages we don't even recognize as cages. Comfortable ones. We've replaced tribes with timelines. Conversations with feeds. Rooms full of people with rooms full of screens. We've engineered a world where you can go an entire day without needing another human being for anything at all. And then we wonder why so many of us reach for something. A drink, a bottle, a screen, a habit we can't put down. To get through the evening. Maybe you were never weak. Maybe the thing you can't stop reaching for was never really the problem. Maybe it's just the shape of the cage.